In this episode, we examine the myth of rural innocence and urban guilt, the story that fuels so many so-called intentional community projects popping up across more rural American landscapes. This one hits close to home. Literally, it's happening on McDaniel Road on the edges of my old stomping grounds of western North Carolina. Developers call it an intentional tiny home community. The brochures promise simplicity, nature, and freedom, the dream of small living on someone else's land. But scratch beneath the surface and you'll find the familiar logic of speculation and displacement, a rebrand of the same forces that have hollowed out towns across Appalachia. It's easy to frame projects like this as good or bad, but the truth is often much more complicated and more revealing. This isn't about heroes or villains, it's about power. About who gets to define words like affordable, inclusive, or intentional, and how those words get weaponized across the tiny home industry to sell simplicity at a premium, often to people who will never actually live or work in the communities these projects reshape. I'm Douglas Stewart McDaniel, and this is Citizen One, exploring our urban future, an Urban Next original podcast series. This one started with a message that hit me like a glitch in the simulation, a DM from an old high school friend from western North Carolina who follows this podcast. Hey, Doug, what's your take on tiny home communities in rural areas? It's a new project on McDaniel Road, and they're trying to drop one right behind my house. Of course, it's McDaniel Road, Rutherford County, North Carolina, just up the road from Lake Lure, so hard hit by Hurricane Helene. I could almost hear the universe laughing from my apartment in Barcelona. What were the odds that a development fight with my own name attached would drag me back into Appalachian rabbit holes of land use planning, belonging, and the question of who stays and who ultimately benefits? My friend's message encouraged me to pause, to think through my old mountain stomping grounds, county zoning maps, housing reports, and international case studies. It wasn't just about a few acres outside Lake Lure. It was about how rural America is being overwritten once again into someone else's vision of utopia, but only for those with enough means. Why does the dream of rural simplicity keep turning into someone else's upscale development plan? That's western North Carolina, and Pacific Palisades and Altadena, and countless other communities battered by climate pressure and overrun by speculators, beautiful, bruised, and perpetually in play. After years of hurricanes, wildfires, and floods, roads rebuilt and washed out again, people are still trying to figure out what recovery even means. My old classmate wasn't asking about design theory, she was asking about home, and about the very definition of neighbor. About what happens when the phrase intentional community gets stapled to another sales brochure. The short answer is anything but simple. A tiny home project can create meaningful housing and chip away at a global housing crisis. Or it can extract profit for out-of-state developers with no local stakes, adding hundreds of cars, new sewage loads, and emergency service demands to fragile rural systems, and leaving local infrastructure to pick up the bill. The developer is Simple Life, a company headquartered just down the mountain from her in Flat Rock, North Carolina. They've built several of these cottage communities here, marketing small homes and shared amenities to retirees, downsizers, second homeowners, and remote professionals seeking a simpler life in scenic settings. Their brand language is seductive: freedom, community, nature, affordability. But the model tells a different story. Residents typically buy the home but lease the land, a structure that keeps upfront costs low while ensuring the company retains ownership and control. It's a postmodern, high-end trailer park with better branding. It's an arrangement that works well for investor portfolios and those second home buyers, but rarely for the local workforce. On their website, Simple Life proclaims, live large, carry less. They promise vibrant, well-designed communities that empower residents to enjoy a simpler lifestyle. But when you compare the language to the actual site on McDaniel Road, the clearing of old woods, the private well pressure, the gated scale of amenities, the number of resales and flips already listed on their website, you begin to see why this vision doesn't necessarily map to the local reality. The promise of freedom may mask a model built for investment, not belonging. The minimal footprint may mask a major land conversion where storm runoff has already proven to be a huge liability to entire communities. The gap isn't just a twist of marketing, it's a civic question. When a developer says everything's included, who pays when the roads cave in, the well runs low, or the slopes fail? For neighbors on Bills Creek, the math is brutally concrete. 280 to 300 planned homes on roughly 54 acres means 5 to 6 units per acre. Urban density on a rural road. That's as many as 600 additional residents and hundreds of new cars on narrow, winding mountain routes that already struggle under storm damage and tourist traffic. People at a recent community meeting didn't speak in abstract planning jargon. They talked about fire trucks getting through, ambulances making the turn, and what happens when 600 more people start flushing toilets into systems never designed for that load. Simple Life's own listing page includes dozens of homes marked not as new build, but as resale. These aren't opportunities, though, for longtime locals. They're investment units, flip ready inventory. When you tout simplicity but sell on the secondary market, the model begins to look less like community and more like real estate arbitrage. Over time, land lease fees rise and the promise of affordable living slides toward the same absentee ownership mindset that has hollowed out so many mountain towns across western North Carolina. Big questions remain. Who will pay for major road upgrades, storm damage repair, sewage septic systems, and flood mitigation, especially in a climate vulnerable region like western North Carolina? Simple life is not unique, it's a symptom of a larger trend. Across Appalachia, what's marketed as intentional living or sustainable community often ends up serving people who already have stability, not those who need it most. The logic is quietly colonial. Import wealth and aesthetics, export local agency, and abandon local ownership. The result is an economic mirage, boutique affordability built on permanent dependency. That's the paradox of the modern mountain dream. You can buy into community, but you can't own the ground beneath it. Developers love to throw around the word affordable. It photographs well, but in practice, affordable usually means cheaper, not attainable, not for teachers, firefighters, or their families. Neighbors have already started using a sharper distinction at these public meetings. This isn't affordable housing at all. It's attainable only for those second home buyers and well off downsizers, not for the low wage workers who need it the most. Across the U.S., we keep ignoring and losing the middle, homes that a working family can actually buy. Urban housing costs have exploded, and rural counties like Rutherford are caught in a strange loop. Land is cheap, but everything else costs too much. Wells, septic, roads, insurance. The math only works if you cut corners or sell to outsiders. That's how speculation sneaks in, disguised as innovation. That's how tiny homes became the latest loophole. They slip under zoning radar, promise eco-minimalism, and when packaged for Airbnb, yield vacation rental profits that would make a coal baron blush. I've seen both versions of this movie, and there are two roads into and out of these woods. In Austin, Texas, Community First Village took 51 acres on the edge of town and turned it into something really radical. A permanent neighborhood for people once homeless, built from microhomes and RVs wrapped in social support and shared purpose. The rent is low, the ownership stable, and the sense of dignity high. In Oregon, Square One villages built tiny home co-ops where residents share equity and decisions. The homes are small, 200 square feet, give or take, but they're owned, not rented. It's not charity, it's agency. These examples matter because what happens on McDaniel Road could echo either path, and each offers a blueprint rural counties could adapt if they cared to. Now compare these important and meaningful benchmarks to what's spreading across rural America under the same banner: speculative eco villages where each unit becomes a short term rental, the land held by an LLC registered 3 states away. The houses might be tiny, but the ambition is gigantic. Extract as much profit as possible before the septic fails or the locals revolt. I was just talking about a similar issue with Ryan Short, the author of The Civic Brand in Season 2, Episode 5 of the Citizen One podcast, about a 30-acre parcel in Santa Fe, the old university site. Big ideas, open land, good intentions. The question isn't, can it be redeveloped, but for whom? But in that episode, we unpacked the visionary leadership of the city of Santa Fe. They refused to surrender to the quickest or most profitable developer scheme. You see the same tension everywhere. In New Zealand, the courts had to step in and declare that tiny houses are still houses, subject to the same environmental rules as any dwelling. It was a way of saying you don't escape responsibility just because you downsized. In the Scottish Highlands, eco cabins are pricing out the very crofters they're meant to honor. And on Lopez Island in Washington, a community land trust quietly builds small, net zero cottages for teachers and carpenters. No press releases, just permanence. The pattern is simple. When land stays local and ownership cooperative, the experiment can work. When it's speculative and marketed to outsiders, it rots from within. The same logic applies to the Alps, the Scottish Highlands, and the Catalan Costa Brava where I live now. Anywhere beauty is commodified, and ownership without stewardship is just extraction. When you pull the curtain back on the hills around the Lake Lure area, you find quiet beauty and brittle infrastructure both. After the monster storm of Hurricane Helene in September 2024, that idyll cracked open. Rain-soaked gullies turned into rivers, roads collapsed as the dam at Lake Lure overtopped, sediment piling up in fields, and the soil itself started behaving badly. Hurricane Helene caused more than $4 billion in regional damage and displaced thousands across the Blue Ridge. And yet, in the marketing push for new, tiny home communities with scenic views, those facts get glossed over. Because if you drop a high-density cluster of vacation rentals in a landscape like that, steep slopes, weakened soils, overloaded infrastructure, you are not solving a housing problem. You're outsourcing risk. Think about the soils in those ridges. A soil strike team from North Carolina State Extension found that farmland in western North Carolina was cloaked in sand, silt, and toxic sediment after Helene. The ground is more than unsettled, and city and county planners need to take their time with infill developments. These communities must demand serious soil studies, risk assessments, and real mitigation plans. Think about the roads. The town's storm recovery notices list emergency dam repairs, sewage system challenges, and streams of debris. At a November community meeting, residents tried to raise exactly these questions about traffic, sewage, wells, and emergency response. The presenter asked them not to record, but North Carolina's open meetings law says otherwise. When a project of this scale arrives and the first instinct is to manage optics rather than share information, it tells you something about who is expected to shoulder the risk. Now imagine people buying into a tiny home model pitched as eco-mountain living when the land beneath them still hasn't finished healing. The promised community becomes a waiting game for infrastructure failure. But rather than anchor place-based belonging, it becomes speculation perched on geologic instability and tourist flux. But take that same 25 or 50 acres, tie it to local ownership, a co-op, a land trust, even a hybrid model where locals get first right of purchase, and you've got something different. A place where firefighters, servers, and school bus drivers can actually live near where they work. That's what Neighbor looks like in 2025. Not resistance to change, but stewardship of it. Showing up early, asking the right questions. Who's funding this? Who holds the deed? And what happens when the Instagram buzz dies? A quick look at Simple Life's own listings tells the story behind those 280 to 300 proposed units and 600 new neighbors. At the Village in Flat Rock, 8 current resale units average $423 per square foot, a range of 378 to 468 square feet. One is 543 square feet at $226,000. Another is 340 square feet at $159,000. In these communities, residents also pay between $350 and $450 per month in land lease alone, depending on home site location and size. That lease covers the dirt, nothing more. On top of that, there's a separate monthly fee for water and sewer, basic cable, trash and recycling, landscaping, and access to shared amenities. When you add it all up, the so-called simple life can easily cost as much as the mortgage on a small house with real land beneath it. The affordability narrative collapses once you run the math. When a developer markets simple living at urban luxury rates on leased land, it's not affordability, it's branding. It isn't a path to rootedness, it's churn. My friend isn't a holdout or a NIMBY, not in my backyard. She is a stakeholder and a neighbor. And she doesn't have to be a planner or a protester to understand that she has to just stand up at a county meeting and ask, will this place belong to the people who live here or to the people who visit? And if she doesn't ask those questions, who will? In the broader context, the housing crisis isn't an urban problem or a rural one. It's a national and an international one. Cities ran out of space, suburbs ran out of soul, and now rural areas are being asked to absorb both the overflow and the fantasy. We need a new compact, a rural modernism with a conscience, build small but forever, keep ownership local, link affordability to income, not marketing, and make infrastructure civic, not optional, and design for topography, not against it. The dream isn't minimalist living, it's durable belonging. I'd mentioned I'd come to see the site next time I'm in North Carolina. I don't get back there much, but maybe we'll walk McDaniel Road together, see if the land feels like it's being invited into the future or conscripted into it. Because that's the test every community faces now, from Santa Fe to the Blue Ridge to the Costa Brava. Are we building homes or just inventory? Are we making neighbors or customers? Tiny homes aren't a panacea, but they might be the question that finally gets us talking about what affordability, ownership, and being a good neighbor really mean. This is a moral cartography of rural America and a map of what happens when belonging becomes a brand. Thanks for joining me today. I'm your host, Douglas Stewart McDaniel, and this is Citizen One, exploring our urban future and Urban Next original podcast series. Also, just an extra note that my debut novel, Ghost Emperor, Volume 1 in the Ashes of Empire saga, is now available on premium pulp fiction. There's links all over the place and in my bio and on my website, citizenone.world. You can pick it up on Kindle or paperback, and the audiobook is coming soon. Can't wait to share it with you. Thanks for joining. We'll see you soon.